Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Heartland Mamas. I'm Murray Briel.
And I'm Heidi Henry, coming to you from two socially distant studios at the edge of the Great Red Divide. For every Tuesday and Thursday at 3 p.m., we bring you the progressive news and views that you can use to tell you what's going on in the world, locally, and in our dear beloved USA. You can find all of our previous episodes at heartlandmamas.com, on all podcast streaming platforms, YouTube, if you want to see our faces, and probably part of the Demcast USA network. Today, Murray, we're talking about 100 days, and not 100 differences, but oh my God, it's like a whole different country.
Yeah, I know, we talk about the first 100 days being really essential to establishing the control of DC and the control of Congress. And the
Yeah,
first 100 days is imperative because it really truly sets the tone. And what political capital a president has is used in that first 100 days. Now, we all knew there had to be some sort of COVID relief. But
right.
that left us with the question of where will his political capital come from and what's he going to emphasize it on?
Murray, both of us being progressives did not expect very much from the centrist Democrat, and we both knew that if elected, any Democrat would be the benefit from the waning days of COVID. Not that we have it under control, hello, India and Brazil, but knowing that had the election gone the other way, we would be India or Brazil right now. We absolutely know that. And it's difficult to look at this 100 days and reflect on the 4 years past and remembering the monotone, bombastic, self serving rhetoric that came out of those joint sessions for 4 consecutive years. Just a whole bunch of worthless self gratification. And then,
Yeah. And
yeah,
you're right. It was a very different speech, and it has been a very different hundred days compared
yes,
to the first president. But you mentioned something, and I want to make sure we let our listeners remind our listeners that, right now India is under a huge surge in COVID. It's where we were. It's worse than where we were at the height. Brazil is also in that same situation, and they have leaders that are Bolsonaro and Modi, and both of them were bombastic populist leaders. That's what we
yeah,
forget. Trump wasn't a Republican, he was a populist. And people like to pretend that the Republicans have some value, but they are actually just populists. And
right.
so, Trump administration, we know, had no plans to deliver the vaccines. They had no contracts for additional vaccines. They miscounted vaccines. It was up to the states. It was kind of a free for all, like having your citizens survive. Was we're going to fight you for it. States red and blue go at it, and
We
that's very
were
much
we
the
were approaching Hunger Games mentality during the pandemic. And I want everybody to reflect back on the first 3 months that we went through a year ago. We were in the middle of it where there was no toilet paper, there was no Lysol, there was no hand sanitizer. We had mayhem, and people were fighting each other over the last rolls of toilet paper.
And
And
that was on a personal level, but
yeah,
federally, our
oh,
states, there was no federal coordinated
no,
response.
nope,
We had the literally the government the federal government swooped in and stole supplies that was given that a state purchased separately. So it was an abundance of chaos, and that's very similar to what Modi and Bolsonaro have. Also, because of the denialism, like you were saying in pre-show, all three, former President Trump, Bolsonaro, and Modi, have something in common, and that
yep,
is their refusal to accept the pandemic for the danger it
exactly.
was because of their fear of not winning re-election.
Right. I mean, Modi went through India and held huge, huge, huge super spreader events recently. Not
Doesn't
to
that sound
mention,
like somebody else did that?
well, yeah, except that, I, well, and then there's a Hindu festival that's held at the Ganges River every year, and he didn't want to deny people the ability to come there. So people came there and then uh, took the virus back out into the countryside, because it's people from all over the country. And India is a huge country. And they all gathered in one place and then took the virus back out. And even 3, 4, 5 weeks, 6 weeks ago, people were traveling through India believing that the virus was over, that India was somehow spared and was different, and were maskless and saying, we've beat COVID. And now people are
And that
dying
was
in the
because of
street.
the leadership of the
Well,
government, the
yeah.
denial, the lies, the
Yep.
exacerbations of false security. And India also is the victim of unbridled greed. They wanted only their vaccine to be produced.
Well,
And
and now Modi wants us to take all the patents away from all the other American countries and the European countries, and give them all the ingredients so that they can make their own Johnson and Johnson and their own AstraZeneca and their own. Well, actually, they were making the AstraZeneca and they did it wrong, so they had to throw a bunch out. But they want them to make their own Pfizer version and make it generically and mass produce it. And India is the largest producer of vaccines in the world, so it would make sense they have all the infrastructure for it. However, they they didn't do the work, and now all they want is the profit margin. It's like, oh, it's so
it's a
typical of
populist
Modi. It's
message. I mean,
so
and then
Trumpian.
we leave those realms, and that's what we want to make sure everybody's aware of, is that we could very easily be where those countries are
Yeah,
today if it was not for a change in leadership that we've had.
right.
And we that's evident by the COVID response. That's evident by max vaccination clinics, not just state and local vaccination clinics, but federal vaccination clinics popping up to help, and the CARE and the Relief Act, the first legislation that he passed in order
COVID
to
relief,
try to
yeah.
make, yes,
American Recovery Plan, that was what it was
the
called.
American
And
Recovery Plan.
part of that was getting 100 million shots into arms, and we went past that and doubled that in the first 100 days. So 200 million shots have been delivered. And people are slowly changing their minds about, should I get a vaccine? It's like we're not just recovering as a country, we're recovering our mental stability. Marie, I just feel like people are finally starting to go, oh my God, science.
And
That's great science.
that was a big takeaway from responses and people's opinions about Joe Biden's speech last night, was that there was a centeredness to it. He has the very folksy way of a calming manner about him. And but there was also criticisms about his speech, and some of them were valid. There was very lightly mentioned immigration reform. And that is something that is important, but I think his priorities are kind of in line where we need to be. Public works projects, something to level the playing field, to assure all people have an equal chance of surviving and thriving.
Well, I think that just, my favorite president, FDR, for all his flaws,
Love FDR for what he
yeah,
did with works. Yep.
right. He, Biden seems to be taking that Rooseveltian philosophy and building it out bigger to include every person of every color and of every gender, and
Every
helping
creed.
them every level of education, and helping them find a job that can help them support their families or themselves. As a parent, your job is to make sure your child can be self-supporting at some point. The sooner the better. And I think it's almost parental how he's looking at this. Like, we have to make sure that people don't have to live hand to mouth. And we've had so much hand to mouth since Reagan. And, one of the takeaways I had yesterday, and we are going to do a whole show just on the public works program. What is it called? The jobs plan,
Mm-hmm.
American Jobs Plan. We're one of the takeaways I had, because you know I hate Ronald Reagan. I
So
flip
do
and
I.
hate Ronald Reagan. And
Agreed.
and the thing that Ronald Reagan said, oh, the worst words you can ever hear is we're the government and we're here to help. And the thing is the government, as Joe Biden succinctly explained yesterday, is the people. We are the government. We elect our officials, we pay the taxes, and the taxes should go to the works for the people, right? We're not talking socialism, we're not talking communism. We're talking about taking our tax dollars and putting them to work for regular people like Murray and I, right? So that people can succeed from the place where they are. And that this myth of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, which is the compassionate, conservative
We
Reaganomics.
always talk about those insane myths that our nation is built upon, which is all fallacy. And
Yeah.
that's what I think you're right, Heidi. I think that Joe Biden is really ripped the band-aid off in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
He has said, we're not going to put up with the crap. We know we have things we need to address, and let's
Mhm.
actually address them, not hide behind white gloves, if you will. Hide
Yeah.
behind civility and make tiny incremental change, because he understands what I think all of us understand, that right now the danger has passed, the immediacy of the last 4 years. But like we talked about on Tuesday, the ramifications for those are going to be felt long and far.
Right.
And I believe Joe Biden understands the gravity and magnitude of that, and I know he wants to make it not repeat itself. I think he actually likes history.
I think he loves history. And I think what my takeaway from watching last night, I'm glad we finally have a president that says the government is here to help. And it is supposed to help. It is supposed to do the heavy lifting for the American people. That's its job. Its job is to do our bidding, what we want it to do. And for so long, it's been given over to corporate America and to the wealthiest Americans, and we've done their bidding.
And he
To
even
the
mentioned
detriment.
trickle down economics in
Hi,
his speech last
my
night. I was
name.
like, I love you, Joe. He mentioned it.
So,
Trickle down doesn't work. And what you're talking about, Heidi, is how the entire foundation of our nation was. It was
right.
designed and created by this tiny little group of privileged white Christian men. And they decided that this is how it should be for everyone. And I think Joe is addressing those issues.
Joe's addressing those issues, and um, we're seeing the changes already in this first 100 days that we need to see. And you can have the detractors. And Tim Scott, I don't know what you're smoking or what speech you heard or what country you live in, but holy cats, talk about out of touch. I
Okay,
thought
wait,
Ted
wait.
Cruz
Before we
was
get
out of
into
touch
Tim
last
Scott,
night.
before we get
Okay,
into Tim Scott, honey, I'm sorry, I don't want to derail you,
that's
but
okay. I jumped ahead to Tim Scott because he's such.
I know, it's going to be so much fun. I just wanted to make sure that we didn't miss anything on his first 100 days or
Oh my
his
gosh.
agenda and what his focus
Yeah.
is before we move on to the Republicans' attitude and rebuttal.
Well, so he opened by saying, America, our house was on fire 100 days ago. Our house was on fire and it seemed like nobody was coming to help. And now he says 100 days later that America is on the move again. And I don't know if on the move again, but I think America is recovering again. And I touched on that earlier. I think there's like a sense and sensibility that's coming back that, I hate to say kinder and gentler nation because that is a very Republican ideology or speech because they don't want kinder and gentler. They want militaristic and overtaxed for everybody but them. Um, but I want to say that it seems like we're more civil and that people seem to be calmer and more focused. And as we go about and we're ramping up to a huge election here in Illinois next year, so it ought to be a bloodbath again. Um, just because the Republicans are so disorganized, so they're just going to start throwing stuff everywhere. But listening to Joe Biden talk about that, and before the election, not a fan. In the primaries, not my guy, not progressive enough, but he's putting forth three huge pieces of legislation The first one being the American Jobs Plan, which is also going to help us with climate recovery. And the fact that it's going to provide good paying union jobs for people who have not gone to college, don't have college debt, and building that infrastructure that we so desperately, direly need. You know, Murray, you talked about when you were running for office about the states of our waterways here in Illinois and throughout the United States. We've seen the devastation in Iowa and Nebraska firsthand from our waterways being neglected for decades.
Mm-hmm.
Now we see the agenda moving forward, not just for our waterways and bridges and roads, but for manufacturing, but for helping, the skilled trades have deep roots in our financial society, and that's what they need. We need these union jobs. You and I are both huge union supporters. We need these union jobs to rebuild our middle class, to get back where we were before Reaganomics. The other thing, Murray, is the American Families Plan, and you and I talked a little bit about this in pre-show, because we don't value the caregivers, the teachers, the daycare workers, the home health aides, the people that work in nursing homes, in preschools. We don't value preschool education. We do here in Illinois. Illinois does a really good job, but they don't do a good job in Kentucky. They do not do a good job in Alabama. And any of the taker states, especially the ones that are what we call the welfare states, the states that take more than they pay in, which Illinois pays way more than we get back from the federal government because we are more organized and more profitable and more productive than Alabama or Mississippi or Florida. States that don't charge income tax, so we have to pay their bills for them. Okay, that's how they get away with not charging income tax. They don't charge income tax because we do, and then we pay their income tax for them. That's exactly how that works, and we've talked about that in previous shows. But the American Families Act, I told you, was very personal for me because my dad died a little over a year ago. And before he died, my sister, Becky, had hired healthcare workers, which I had assumed were covered by his insurance, were covered by his own financial backing, were covered by the county, by his township. None of it was. It came out of her pocket. She was paying for this. And we depended, because all of us were working, on these caregivers to be with our pops so he could stay in his home where he wanted to be. Even when he was in the nursing home, we had extra caregivers in there to make sure he was bathed and dressed so that those workers that had 12 patients per worker could go and bathe and dress and feed somebody else.
Right. And that's a sad state. So I like that he is addressing that.
Yeah.
And I like that, he's finally addressing inequality across the board. And so it seems like from all logical, all normal people, or at least people like us, that what he's doing is going to make the whole nation better. No more lead water, bridges that don't fall apart and land on your car and cause a 3-car pileup. We're talking about basics, a living wage. So these things are all pretty amazing. And then you have representatives and senators on the other side of the aisle who love to talk about disrespectful. And I don't know what's more disrespectful than watching Ted Cruz take a nap, or maybe it was Boebert's emergency blanket. But those types of stunts are so
They're
petty.
stunts. They're stunts,
Right.
and they are petty, Murray. They're childish. They're immature. They bring nothing to the table and nothing to the discussion. They serve no purpose except to serve themselves. And those people are people who are masters of social media, but not masters of running their own portion of the government. They do little or nothing, Boebert especially, but Ted Cruz doesn't really write or author any
Well,
legislation.
Ted, hey.
Yeah.
Ted goes on vacation. Cruz goes on vacation when his state's in crisis. He
Right.
also doesn't defend his wife when she's being
No.
attacked by the potential future president. Yeah, he does a lot of things.
He does nothing. He brings nothing to the table.
Nothing of value.
No, he is worthless. He's absolutely worthless. And Texas, you're stuck with them. You're stuck with them. And we've done whole shows on Texas.
She's not wrong, people. But
Yeah.
as we get closer to the end here, we need to also talk about the rebuttal. So everyone knows that when whoever the president is, they give their speech, and then the opposition party gives what is called a rebuttal.
Yeah.
And it's usually, hey, they're not doing this, they're not doing this, blah blah blah. So this year's rebuttal came from Senator Tim Scott from South Carolina. And Senator Scott is actually one of the louder voices on the right about police reform and justice and sentencing,
Yeah.
and almost on the right side, almost in the center, and willing to work with across the aisle to come up with a strong plan to protect our black and brown community members. And he gets to deliver the rebuttal. And my estimation of him tanked. Here you have this guy, right? And he has the ability to take what he's doing and use it as a jumping board and say, we are all in for supporting legislation, and we're working together, and it can happen in a bipartisan way. And he could have really said himself, and instead it looked like, I told Heidi, that the My Pillow guy, Mike Liddell, showed up and passed him the speech, because halfway through it, Steve and I are listening, and I'm like, what the? This sounds like literally the RNC convention. Like the words were from
CPAC. It was
Trump's
CPAC.
mouth, and
Yeah.
the phrasing, everything. Like, it wasn't his own words. So here he has this amazing opportunity to establish himself as being someone who could potentially
A
be a leader,
Republican man of color. That's like the
who has
chupacabra.
integrity, right? And he could have used that to propel himself forward and build a bigger base. And all he did was talk in immature, childlike phrases with no description about things that Joe Biden didn't even talk about. I'm sorry, it was extraordinarily annoying.
I'm listening to him, and I look at my husband and I go, what country is he from? Because it was like, where is he at? Because whatever he's saying makes zero sense.
Yeah,
and has
like,
zero
I
to do with the
seriously.
speech.
Okay,
It
so
has zero to
have
do with
you
the last 100 days.
ever read a poor research paper, right?
Yeah.
Or a kid's rough draft, or a college student's rough draft, right? You're reading the paper,
was
and
like a fifth grade.
you start reading it, and all of a sudden you're like, wait, what? Where did that come? Huh? None of it was even connected. And even the wording of it, there were parts that felt like it came from him, and then parts that felt very foreign and awkward, like they didn't belong in the same speech. Mike Liddell slipped him a paragraph.
I all I kept thinking is there's so many, like, and I think about Lindsey Graham and Ted Cruz, who are lapdogs, and Josh Hawley. Josh Hawley, by the way, the only, not present last night, but the only person to vote against the Asian hate bill. The only person. Josh Hawley.
Hawley's
No
a
surprise.
PS.
No surprise there, Josh Hawley. But
And they
he knows
hide
everyone.
under the guise of freedom. That's one thing we have to remember is Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz and Lorna Boebert and Marjorie Taylor Greene. They all hide behind this false narrative of unconstitutional, when really what it should be, they should be calling it, is inactionable.
Well, listening to Tim Scott last night, all I kept thinking is, what do the GOP have on him? What does Trump have on? Because you can't explain Lindsey Graham without knowing that, and there's a big scandal right now, everybody. There's this huge scandal brewing with Lindsey Graham right now. And I tweeted about it under Truly Heidi Henry. If you want to look, there's a connection to the scandal, to my own Twitter page. But because it was just so bizarre, right? We always knew that the Republicans had something on him, and that's why he behaves in the manner he does. And we know that there's something, they must have something on Ted Cruz. They had something on Franklin Graham, and it came out. And I wonder what they have on Tim Scott, because the way he was speaking,
He felt like a
it was,
hostage video.
it did. I kept
It
waiting
felt
for
a
him
bit
to
like
blink.
a
Help
hostage
me.
video.
Help me.
Except without the terror in his eyes, but it felt a little
No, he looked well
um
medicated.
yeah, it felt a little what's the Stockholmish. Yeah.
It did. Maybe it's Stockholm Syndrome, you know, or, oh, like Munchausen by proxy. Maybe it's rebuttal by proxy, right?
All I know is it was a sad attempt at
It was
destroying.
sad.
And I'm not saying that, they might not have had criticisms about the first 100 days. I am
Oh,
not
yeah.
waving
Too
a
many
Joe Biden
executive orders.
flag and saying,
Yeah.
oh, only good things. But again, it was an opportunity to talk about differences, to make a name for themselves, to stand for something instead of against everything. And they were incapable of doing it. And I
You
think
know,
that's the big takeaway from the last 100 days.
especially with the Voting Rights Act, the John Lewis Act that's out there floating around, Tim Scott could have built a world of credibility for the Republican Party by acknowledging the shortcomings of the Georgia election elections bills that they passed. He could have done a lot for the Republican Party by talking about the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. Those are things that are his demographic. Those are the people who his that elect him every year that would benefit from that. And instead of building bridges, he decided to push the plunger and blow everything up in a fifth grade manner. I mean, it was more like rubbing
Yeah.
two matches together because that's all you got.
Maybe
But
Kaylee McEnany was the one that wrote that speech because it
oh
had
god,
about the intellectual level of a fourth grader. But on that note, folks, we are going to wrap up here. And we want to make sure that you know that we come to you live every Tuesday and Thursday at 3 o'clock Central Standard Time on Facebook. You can catch all of our previous episodes on YouTube, any place you get your favorite podcast, Dumbcast
yep,
USA. And be sure to check us out. Like, subscribe, and share so you can win a really cool Heartland Mamas t shirt. You got to smash that
especially on
button on
YouTube.
YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
And thanks so much for joining in, guys. We'll be back next week. Heartland Mamas.
MAMAS.com. We'll see you later. Watch for our Unrolled series on independent radio. We'll see you later. Bye bye.
Bye. I'm learning how to push the buttons to close.